The night was quiet in West Des Moines, Iowa, on June 26, 2024. A lone police officer patrolled the empty streets, the hum of his cruiser cutting through the stillness. He spotted a cyclist weaving along the road, a bicycle without a rear reflector glinting faintly under the streetlights. It was a minor violation, routine, the kind of stop that happens 100 times a night. The officer flipped on his lights, expecting a quick conversation, maybe a warning. But as he approached the man, something felt off. The cyclist's hands trembled slightly as he fumbled for his ID. "Greg Stallings," he said, his voice steady but his eyes darting. The officer ran the name, and the computer blinked back an impossible result. Gregory Stallings was dead. "All right, brother. Time to be honest with me," the officer said, his tone sharpening. "The info you gave me comes back to a dead guy." What unfolded next would unravel a 30-year mystery, exposing a fugitive who had slipped through the cracks of justice for decades. How does a man vanish for 30 years, living among us, hiding a monstrous past? And what happens when a routine stop cracks open a case that law enforcement thought was long cold? This is a story for true crime enthusiasts, for those who crave the thrill of the chase, the shock of discovery, and the weight of justice finally served. By the end, you'll see how a single moment can unravel decades of deception, and why no one, not even a ghost, can hide forever. Background and set up in the early 1980s, Chippewa County, Wisconsin, was a place of rolling fields and quiet rural life, where neighbors knew each other and doors often went unlocked. It was the kind of place where violent crime felt like a distant rumor, something that happened in big cities, not here. But on a chilling day in 1983, that illusion shattered. A young woman, whose identity remains protected in court records, was going about her day when her world turned upside down. George Hartleroad, then a 30-year-old man with a brooding presence, targeted her in a calculated act of violence. He wasn't a stranger passing through. He was a local, someone who blended into the fabric of the community. His actions would leave a scar on Chippewa County that lingered for decades. Hartleroad's crime was meticulously brutal. He approached his victim with a knife, its blade catching the light as he issued his demands. He forced her to comply with unspeakable acts, binding her hands and silencing her screams. Then, in a move that spoke to his cold detachment, he stuffed her into the trunk of her own car, the metal slamming shut with a thud that echoed in her nightmares. He drove her to a remote area where the trees stood like silent witnesses and tied her to one, leaving her exposed to the elements. It was only by chance that two women jogging nearby stumbled upon her, their gasps breaking the eerie silence as they untied her and called for help. The victim survived, but the trauma would haunt her for years, a shadow that never fully faded. Hartleroad was arrested, tried and convicted in 1984 for false imprisonment, possession of a short-barreled rifle, and endangering safety by conduct regardless of life. The court sentenced him to 9 years in prison, a punishment that to many seemed too light for the horror he inflicted. But Hartleroad served his time quietly, blending into the prison system, his name fading from public memory. In 1995, he was transferred to a halfway house in Madison, Wisconsin, a step toward reintegration. It was here that he saw his chance. One day in July, he simply walked away, vanishing into the vast American landscape. The authorities issued warrants, but Hartleroad was gone, a ghost slipping through their fingers. For nearly 3 decades, he remained a phantom, his whereabouts unknown, his crimes a distant memory to all but those who carried the scars. Meanwhile, in West Des Moines, Iowa, a community of suburban families and retirees went about their lives, unaware that a fugitive had been living among them for years. George Hartleroad, now 71, had built a new life under the alias Gregory Stallings. He was a quiet man, unremarkable, the kind of neighbor who kept to himself. He rode his bicycle through the streets, worked odd jobs, and avoided drawing attention. To those who knew him, he was just Greg, a harmless older man with a weathered face and a reserved demeanor. But beneath the surface, he carried the weight of his past, a secret that could unravel everything. The crime. The crime itself was a descent into terror, a meticulously planned act that revealed Hartleroad's capacity for cruelty. In 1983, he stalked his victim, watching her movements, waiting for the perfect moment. The details are harrowing. The glint of the knife, the roughness of the rope as he bound her wrists, the suffocating darkness of the car trunk. The victim's heart pounded as she heard the engine roar, each mile taking her further from safety. Hartleroad's actions were not impulsive. They were deliberate, calculated to instill fear and control. He drove her to a secluded spot in rural Chippewa County, where the world felt impossibly far away. Tying her to a tree, he left her vulnerable, exposed to the elements and the terror of abandonment. The isolation amplified her fear, every rustle of leaves a potential threat. Her survival hinged on the chance discovery by two joggers who became her lifeline in a moment of unimaginable horror. The crime sent shockwaves through Chippewa County. In a community where trust was implicit, Hartleroad's actions shattered that sense of security. Families locked their doors, parents held their children closer, and the local news buzzed with fear and speculation. Who was this man, and how had he hidden his darkness for so long? The trial that followed was a grim affair, with the victim's testimony painting a vivid picture of her ordeal. Hartleroad showed little remorse, his face impassive as the guilty verdict came down. But even as he was sentenced, questions lingered. Would 9 years be enough to change a man capable of such violence? And what would happen when he was released? Investigation fast forward to June 26, 2024 in West Des Moines. The investigation that led to Hartleroad's capture began with a stroke of luck and a keen-eyed officer. The body cam footage, later released to the public, captures the moment the routine stop took a sharp turn. "Greg Stallings is your name?" the officer asked, his tone casual but probing. "Gregory Stallings," the man replied, spelling it out carefully. Gregory Stallings. The officer typed the name into his system, expecting a quick match. Instead, the screen flashed a jarring result. Gregory Stallings was deceased. The officer's voice hardened. "The info you gave me comes back to a dead guy. Gregory Stallings is dead." Hartleroad doubled down, insisting, "I'm not dead," his voice tinged with defiance. But the officer wasn't buying it. He pressed further, asking for a social security number, which Hartleroad provided. Another dead end, tied to the same deceased identity. For 30 minutes, the officer questioned Hartleroad, his suspicion growing with each evasive answer. "You don't think you got warrants or anything, do you?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. Hartleroad shrugged, claiming ignorance. The officer requested he remove his hat and glasses for a facial recognition photo, a move that made Hartleroad visibly uneasy. As more officers arrived, the pressure mounted. Finally, Hartleroad cracked, his voice low as he admitted his true name, George Hartleroad. The officers exchanged stunned glances. "What's crazy is that 1995, that means you've been on the run longer than 2 of the 3 officers here have been alive," one said, the weight of the revelation sinking in. The West Des Moines Police Department ran Hartleroad's real name through their database, and the hits came flooding in. Outstanding warrants from Wisconsin, a conviction for kidnapping and sexual assault, and an escape from a halfway house in 1995. The pieces fell together quickly. Hartleroad had been living in Iowa for 2 decades, hiding in plain sight, using the identity of a dead man to evade detection. The officers were baffled but professional, cuffing Hartleroad and taking him into custody. "None of us are mad at you," one officer said, shaking his head. "I'm just baffled that law enforcement has let you go for 30 years. The investigation into how Hartleroad evaded capture for so long revealed a mix of cunning and systemic failures. In the 1990s, tracking fugitives across state lines was a logistical challenge. Databases were less interconnected, and Hartleroad's low profile helped him slip through the cracks. He avoided major crimes, kept his interactions minimal, and used a stolen identity to build a new life. But the 2024 stop exposed a critical flaw in his plan. Even a minor violation could trigger scrutiny in the digital age. The facial recognition technology and cross-state database checks that didn't exist in 1995 were now standard, and they spelled the end of Hartleroad's freedom. What do you think the officers felt in that moment, realizing they'd stumbled onto a fugitive who'd outrun justice for 3 decades? Pause and consider. How does someone live with that secret for so long, always looking over their shoulder? Outcome and aftermath. Hartleroad's arrest on June the 26th, 2024, marked the end of his 30-year run. He was extradited to Wisconsin, where he faced charges for his 1995 escape from the halfway house. The legal proceedings were swift. At 71, Hartleroad was no longer the young man who had committed the 1983 crime, but the weight of his past remained. Wisconsin authorities confirmed his identity through fingerprints and records, closing a case that had long been relegated to the cold case files. The victim, now decades older, was notified of the arrest. Though her identity remains private, sources suggest she felt a mix of relief and reopened wounds, a reminder of a trauma she'd worked hard to move past. The community reaction was one of shock and unease. In West Des Moines, neighbors who knew Greg Stallings as a quiet, unassuming man were stunned to learn his true identity. "He seemed so normal," one resident told KCCI News. "He'd wave when he rode by on his bike. How do you live next to someone like that and not know?" The story dominated local headlines, with outlets like URSN and WSAZ replaying the body cam footage, the officer's voice echoing, "Time to be honest with me." The case also sparked discussions about the limitations of the justice system in the pre-digital era and the power of modern technology to close old cases. Nationally, the story gained traction as a testament to persistence. The FBI, while not directly involved in the initial stop, highlighted the case in their broader efforts to track fugitives, noting that advances in technology have made it harder for criminals to hide. The arrest also raised questions about how many other fugitives might still be living under assumed identities, blending into communities across the country. For Chippewa County, the capture brought a sense of closure, but also a reminder of the vulnerability that lingers in even the safest places. What would you do if you discovered someone you knew was hiding a past like Hartleroad's? Would you feel betrayed, or would you question how well you ever really know anyone? Closing reflection. George Hartleroad's story is a chilling reminder that evil can hide in plain sight, masquerading as the ordinary. For 30 years, he lived among us, a ghost in the system, carrying the weight of his crimes while blending into the rhythm of everyday life. His capture, sparked by something as mundane as a missing bicycle reflector, underscores a profound truth. Justice, though slow, can be relentless. The officers who stopped him that night in West Des Moines didn't just enforce a traffic law, they unraveled a decades-long deception, giving a voice back to a victim who thought her attacker was gone forever. This case leaves us with a haunting question. How many others are out there, living under false names, waiting for a routine moment to bring their past crashing down? In a world where technology tightens the net, no one can hide forever. But the shadows they leave behind remind us to stay vigilant, to lock our doors, and to never assume the person next door is who they say they are.